What's up everyone, it's King Moose here with JCross X to welcome you all back for episode 45 of Class Overview. For those who aren't familiar, the Class Overview series is a collection of informative videos where we'll be discussing the different classes in Fire Emblem 3 houses. We'll be going over general information about each class like their certification requirements, stats, abilities, and their overall strengths and limitations to determine their viability and what units are a good fit for each class. As per usual, these videos will be gameplay focused, so there shouldn't really be any major spoilers, but I advise you anyways to watch your own discretion, and if you haven't played 3 houses yet, you absolutely should. This episode will be focused on the Dark Knight class. It's a 7 move class while mounted, and while dismounted only drops down to 6 move, which isn't too big of a difference. Once again, this class follows the cavalry movement archetype, so in all types of tiles aside from regular tiles, your unit will suffer a greater movement penalty compared to infantry units, and stairs have an even harsher penalty. It's important to note that this class allows full access to a unit spell list. It gets both Black Tome Fair and Dark Tome Fair, which increase the damage you do with black or dark magic spells respectively by 5. As a mounted class, it also gets Canto, which allows you to use your leftover movement after performing an action, assuming you're mounted. In order to certify for Dark Knight, your unit will need at least a B+ rank in Reason, A rank in Riding, and C rank in Lances. As usual, it can be Gamble with a bit lower ranks. The certification can be a little difficult for male magic units, as the high Riding requirement is difficult and unrewarding to raise without Axe of the Valkyrie. Female magic units, it's a lot easier since Valkyrie works great as a transitional class. For cavalry units that are promoting from Paladin, the Reason requirement is a difficult one to meet, but not unreasonable if you have a boon or budding talent. As for skill bonuses, Dark Knight once again grants a +3 skill XP boost to all its certification requirement skills, those being Reason, Riding, and Lances. The Riding boost is nice as always to pick up movement +1 at the A+ rank, which this class certainly appreciates. The Reason boost is good for potentially unlocking your A rank spell, as well as Reason level 5 at A+, and Black or Dark magic range +1 at the S rank. The Lance boost is also surprisingly useful, both for units who use Dark Knight as a hybrid class and those who use it purely for magic damage. Several candidates for this class have the combat art Frozen Lance to make Lance damage scale off of magic, so either way, picking up a higher Lance prowess level and possibly a Lance crit +10 can be very useful. The only thing unfortunate about these skill rank bonuses is the lack of a Faith bonus, since it's a spellcasting class, so just keep that in mind if you have not yet unlocked all your useful Faith spells.
The base stats of Dark Knight follow a very similar trend we have discussed with most master classes. Its strength and defense are of course mediocre due to the nature of being mostly a magical class, while the other stats are all fine but don't present any standouts. The 17 base magic and 15 base res are the same as both Warlock and Dark Bishop, so if you come from either of those classes, you're not going to see any gains from this. Valkyrie's bases are quite bad, and if you don't certify for Warlock first, you could see an increase in magic when certifying for Dark Knight, but by this point, a lot of magic units will have well over 17 magic anyways. The Dex and Luck are tied with the other master classes for the highest in the game, whilst having average HP and speed. Most of these bases are barely better than the advanced ones, and as such, this trend of 3 houses not having good bases in 95% of classes continues. Moving on to the growth rates, which are actually pretty solid. It's tied with the highest magic growth that's shared with numerous other magic classes at a +10% growth modifier, whilst also having a mostly negligible, but somewhat appreciated +5% growth to strength that's probably intended for units in this class that actually have decent strength to use lances, as by this point, a lot of units usually have enough strength to offset most, if not all of their spells' weight. It has some other mostly negligible modifiers such as a +5% to defense, charm, and a -5% growth penalty to speed. This is somewhat annoying, but a shared statistical shortcoming of pretty much all cavalry units and doesn't make much of a difference anyways. Lastly, it has the standard +10% growth modifier to HP that most magical classes have, as well as a +10% to res that can over time potentially help increase survivability when dueling enemy mages. As for boost, they further solidify this class as having a well-rounded spread, similar to other growths. It bolsters an appreciated +2 to magic, which gives units an innate +7 to black and dark magic damage whilst in this class. It also comes with decent bulk, with a +1 to HP, +2 to defense while mounted, +1 dismounted, and +3 to res. The res boost can help increase the unit's total res to buff magical combat arts such as Lightning Axe and Hexblade. In a similar vein, the class's +2 to dex is decent for stacking as much dex as possible to supplement Frozen Lance's damage, a combat art that's much more common amongst the users of this class. Dex is also accounted for in the magic hit and crit formulas, so it still helps in that regard too. Lastly, the class has a +1 to strength as well as a -1 to speed while mounted, and vice versa while dismounted, being +1. If you do want to take advantage of the extra speed and don't need to canto away, you can definitely take advantage of dismounting your strategy if you wish. Overall, Dark Knight's stats aren't exceptional, but they definitely aren't bad, supplementing units in it with decent boosts across the board whilst not having any major shortcomings.
The mastery ability of Dark Knight is Seal Resistance. This ability works very similarly to Seal Defense from the Wyvern Rider video. It activates whenever a unit damages an enemy using any type of weapon or no weapon at all. It works during both the player phase and enemy phase, so technically the enemy phase is more efficient for activating it, since one unit can damage several enemies during it and apply Seal Resistance to all of them. However, due to strategies I will cover shortly, it is often better utilized as a player phase ability. When it activates, Seal Resistance reduces the enemy's res by 6 for an entire turn. You cannot stack Seal Res on the same enemy multiple times, and unfortunately it also does not seem to be able to stack with other methods of reducing res like the combat art Schism Shot. In those cases, only the greater res decrease, that being Seal Res, would be applied. The issue with debuffing abilities like these is that most enemies are going to die after 1 or 2 attacks anyways, so the value you get at taking the time to debuff them is very limited. The best use of Seal Res and these other abilities is going to be against monsters and other boss enemies, since they have multiple health bars and just high HP in general. Applying Seal Res early on at the beginning of the player phase can allow your other magic units to essentially get a +6 buff to their damage when attacking the enemy. This can make taking down these boss enemies more efficient. This is pretty much the only good thing we can say about this ability, unfortunately. Seal Defense has the same benefit, but it's significantly better since it's available much earlier in the game due to being the mastery of an advanced class rather than a master class. It's also just more widely useful since most compositions will have much more physical units than magic units, so there will be more units to capitalize off Seal Defense than Seal Res. It's not completely useless in terms of utility, but we already didn't have a particularly high opinion of Seal Defense, so it's safe to say that Seal Res is a mediocre mastery and isn't going to be a mainstay in magic builds or a big selling point for Dark Knight.
Dark Knight is a pretty solid class that has a couple strengths. First, 7 move while mounted and 6 while dismounted is definitely above average for a magic class, only beaten by Darkflyer's 7 move with flight. The effective range of Dark Knight is pretty long, especially if you take the time to raise reason as far as possible for dark or black magic range +1. Obviously, being mounted means it comes equipped with Kanto, making its combat pretty flexible and safe. The flying classes, such as the aforementioned Darkflyer, may have the better overall movement, but being grounded comes with its own benefits. We've talked about them quite a few times before, but this is specifically quite relevant in the case of Dark Knight versus Darkflyer, given the fact there's only one magic flying battalion in the game. Combined with the fact that this class isn't gender locked, Dark Knight generally has superior flexibility even if it is strong in certain departments as Darkflyer, such as being a rescue user. Additionally, being grounded also means healing and more importantly guard adjutants are available, and given that Dark Knight has decent bulk for a magic class, this is appreciated. Next, we have the class abilities, which although we are doubling up here on fair skills, this is actually pretty nice in the case of Dark Knight. Similar to Grey Knight with both Axe Fair and Lance Fair, giving Dark Knight both Reason Tome Fairs means that it improves viability sheerly based on the fact this increases the amount of units you can make an argument for throwing into this class. Additionally, it's the only class that provides Dark Tome Fair innately, which provides a unique niche in that regard. This is part of the reason that made Valkyrie flexible too, and this applies to mostly any class that supplements damage or other benefits to multiple weapons and or spell types. In our opinion, Dark Knight is one of the classes that's pretty simple on paper, similar to Bow Knight in the last episode, but it doesn't make it bad by any means. It's pretty flexible with unit options, has good combat, and a solid move gives it more of a use case for certain utility spells.
Unfortunately, Dark Knight has a few weaknesses to consider. Once again, the cavalry movement penalties can be difficult on several of the late game maps and most routes. However, this isn't as big of a deal for Dark Knight as it is for some of the other cavalry classes because the difference between its movement while mounted and dismounted is only 1, so you can afford to dismount frequently on the disadvantageous maps, though you do lose access to Kanto, which is rough. It still does have to be compared to Darkflyer in this regard though, as an alternate option for an offensive focused spellcasting class with Kanto. Darkflyer is just better at using spells like Rescue and in most combat circumstances as well because of its more versatile movement. It also has to be compared to the other DLC magic class, Valkyrie. Valkyrie works great as a transitional class in a Dark Knight, as we mentioned before, but it's also a competitor of Dark Knight in its own right. Valkyrie has one lower move than Dark Knight and lacks a Tome Fair ability, but it supplements this with a slightly higher magic stat boost and a +1 range boost to its spells. This extra range can sometimes be more versatile than the extra point of movement that Dark Knight has, depending on the unit and the spells they have access to. We personally think that it's worth it to promote from Valkyrie to Dark Knight in most cases, but it's a close call, and the fact that there's even a question about it is a serious problem for Dark Knight's viability, since Valkyrie is available 10 levels earlier and requires significantly less investment. Additionally, as an offensive spellcasting class, Dark Knight has to deal with a lot of the typical mage problems in 3 houses. Offensive spells do not scale very well to the endgame for the most part, and while you can also use magic combat arts like Frozen Lance or Lightning Axe which scale better, this means that on certain units, Dark Knight has to compete with other mounted options like Paladin and Wyvern Lord. If a unit doesn't need to keep access to their spell list, it's arguably better to go with one of those physical classes since they grant a weapon fair skill to boost those combat arts. Magic units typically stay viable in the later game due to their utility options, and while Dark Knight is a decent class for certain utility spells, its lack of flight or white magic uses times 2 makes it outclassed by alternative options like Gremry or Darkflyer for utility purposes.
Given these strengths and weaknesses, we're going to settle on a 7 out of 10 as our final rating for Dark Knight. It's got a solid collection of things going for it, such as decent stats, good class abilities, and being a magical class that has high moves similar to Valkyrie. Even while dismounted, 6th move is nothing to sneeze at. Overall, it's a pretty great magical class. While there was clearly an attempt made to make this more of a hybrid class with a bit of strength that it provides, most options err on the side of magic, whether it be nuking things with strong spells or magical combat arts. You won't really use lances much in this class unless your unit has something like Frozen Lance, but being a cavalry class is definitely useful for magic units given how bad most of their move tends to be, even in the advanced stage. This leads us to our unit recommendations, and for our standout, we're going to have to give this to Hubert, but this is by a relatively small margin since there are a lot of good fits for this class. Hubert himself is only neutral in riding, but does have a boon in raising as well as his budding talent in lances, which is definitely an important pickup, considering it grants him the previously mentioned Frozen Lance combat art. While not really having any utility, his reason spell list is very good, and being able to nuke things with Frozen Lance while cantoing away is appreciated, especially if he runs out of his stronger spells. His high magic growth, combined with his class's innate +7 to reason magic damage, means you'll definitely hit quite hard with him in this class. The main reason for this recommendation, though, definitely falls to the lack of a general lock, as it provides him a nice magic combat class with actual decent move, since he can't access Dark Flyer or Valkyrie. The one major downside I'd say is that he's locked to the Crimson Flower route, meaning that he has to deal with the unfortunate unfriendly cavalry terrain. This isn't the worst thing in the world given Dark Knight's 6 move while dismounted, but something worth considering. Next we have Lorenz, who also appreciates the non-general lock magic class. Lorenz seems to be designed for this class in a sense, since the stat spread definitely leans towards being a mixed attacker, whilst also bolstering a boon in all 3 certification requirements, making pushing for this class extremely easy even without Valkyrie being available. While being a mixed attacker is debatably useful in this class, as well as in 3 houses in general, being able to swap between his Solid Reason Spell List and Frozen Lance to physical damage when needed is not a bad attribute to have, even if he won't hit quite as hard as some other units. Hanneman is also worth mentioning here given the fact that he has similar issues to other male mages, which is the lack of class options. He has a Reason and Riding boon, making certification easy, and overall it's probably just his best spellcasting class in the endgame. As for other Frozen Lance users, we have Marianne. While neutral in Reason, she does have a budding talent Lances and a boon in Riding. Personally, I like to have her be a menace and Falcon Knight doing absurd damage with Frozen Lance on that class, but if you value her pretty solid spell list, then throwing her in this class is not a bad option for her. Next we have Annette, who has solid magic damage and a good Reason spell list similar to the other previous recommendations. She has access to the magical combat art Lightning Axe, and in a similar case to Marianne, if you don't want to put her on a Falcon, or in this case a Wyvern because you value her spells, then this class isn't too difficult to certify for her since she's female, has a Reason boon, and no Banes in Lance or Riding. Next we have Sylvain and Ingrid. Both of them have boon and Lances and Riding, and Sylvain has a budding talent in Reason, making this certification pretty easy for the both of them. They also have pretty decent spell lists despite the fact they are typically oriented towards physical attacking, and each have their own magical combat art being Lightning Axe for Sylvain and Frozen Lance for Ingrid. Lastly, I wanted to mention the 4 other dark magic users besides Hubert. Both Happy and Lysithea debatably want to end Gremory, or could just stay in Valkyrie, but both have good spell lists and can absolutely nuke things in this class if they wish. Giving them innate Dark Tomefare alongside more magic battalions compared to something like Dark Flyer or Valkyrie that lack one of these attributes respectively means Dark Knight is a potential endgame consideration for them. Yuritsa is an interesting mention since he's one of the only units that has Dark and Black magic, which are both boosted in this class. Generally speaking though, his personal class Death Knight is statistically superior and tailored more towards the stronger physical damage, whilst also still being able to use his magic for chip damage from Death or Thoron. As for Edelgard, she's also obviously more tailored towards physical attacking too, but we mentioned her as an actual somewhat decent off-meta option in Valkyrie, so we'll mention her here too. She's also the only other unit that has both Dark and Black magic, which is interesting. If you want to have a magical Edelgard, this is definitely one of the classes you can take advantage of that purpose for.
This rating is going to put Dark Knight at the upper end of B tier, very close to moving up to A tier. It's a solid spellcasting class that has a complicated relationship with the introduction of the DLC classes. The addition of Valkyrie makes the promotion path to Dark Knight more accessible in female units, which is definitely good, but both Valkyrie and Dark Flyer serve as this class's biggest competition. It's a good option on pretty much every magic unit, but it's debatable if it's really the absolute best option on any one particular unit, which is why it goes here. According to the poll on JCross's channel, Dark Knight is in second place for the best Master Cavalry class at 22% of the vote. We definitely agree with these results, and though we gave Bow Knight a higher rating, we can definitely see the logic behind why some people would vote Dark Knight over Bow Knight. Many comments highlighted how Dark Knight has arguably the best overall magic combat in the game, factoring in both movement and damage, as well as how helpful it is for male units so they don't get access to its biggest competitors, Dark Flyer and Valkyrie. Overall, it's definitely an above average class, and while it may not always be the absolute most optimal one in every situation, I definitely think it's very fun to use and it has one of the coolest visual designs of any class, so I would recommend trying it out if you haven't used one before. That can fit well into almost any composition and provide consistent value. That's basically all I have to say about the Dark Knight class. If you like the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment. I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels. Stay tuned for episode 46 on JCross's channel, where we'll be moving on to the next master class, Holy Knight.